The dread hit the destroyer Cormorant before the alien ship ever showed a face. It came through the deck plates first, a pressure without sound, the way a storm announces itself in the fillings of the teeth. Captain Iris Vane felt it climb her spine and settle at the base of her skull, and she watched it take her bridge crew one by one, Priya Nandakumar's hands going still on the sensor board, Jonah Okafor's throat working like he'd forgotten how to swallow, Bex Halloran at tactical gone the color of old paper. Nobody had said a word. The thing in front of them had not fired, had not hailed, had not even resolved on the main screen into anything the eye could hold. And already every human on the Cormorant wanted, with a wanting that came up from somewhere older than language, to lie down on the deck and cover their heads. "Report," Vane said. Her own voice sounded strange to her, thin and far away, but it came out level, and that was the thing that mattered. That was the only thing that mattered right now. Nandakumar didn't answer. She was staring at her board with her lips parted, and a fine tremor had started in her shoulders. "Ensign?" Vane crossed to her, put a hand flat on the console next to the girl's, not touching her, just close. "Priya, read me the board." The contact had come out of nothing 4 minutes ago. The Cormorant was 3 weeks into a survey run along the Karsh Verge, the ragged edge of charted space where the Reach's maps went from lines to guesses, and the mission had been so quiet that half the crew had started calling it a rest cure. Then the drift buoys they'd been laying went dark in a wave, all 40 of them, one after another along a line, as if a hand had drawn a finger across the dark and switched them off. And out of the place where the buoys had died came the pressure. "It's Nandakumar swallowed. It's big, ma'am. Mass reads off the top of the scale. It's not the returns don't make sense, it's like the sensors don't want to look at it. Every time I try to lock, the resolution falls apart." "It doesn't want to be measured," Okafor said quietly from comms. "That's a choice." Vane straightened. On the main screen the object was a smear, a wrongness in the starfield the size of her hand at arm's length, and even a smear at that range meant something kilometers long. It sat in the black perhaps 200,000 kilometers out and did nothing, and the doing nothing was worse than any move it could have made. "Tomas," she said. Her XO came up beside her. Tomas Reyes was a big man, calm by trade, and his jaw was tight. "I've felt scared before," he said low for her alone. "This isn't that. This is something reaching in and turning a dial." "I know. The whole ship's feeling it. Engineering's got 2 people down. Medical's asking permission to sedate." "Denied." Vane raised her voice, pitched it to carry the length of the bridge. "Listen to me, all of you, that pressure you're feeling, that's a weapon. It's the first thing they've shown us, and it's a weapon, and it's working, which means it's the best thing they've got, or they'd have shown us something else. Do you understand what I'm telling you? They're not softening us up for the fight. This is the fight. And it's not touching the hull, it's not touching the reactor, it's not touching one rivet on this ship. It's only touching us." She let that sit a second. "So we're going to disappoint them." Halloran let out a breath that was half a laugh, and some color came back into the bridge with it. Fear shared out among 40 people is lighter than fear carried alone. Vane had learned that a long time before she ever wore a captain's tabs, and she spent the knowledge now like coin. "Nandakumar, keep trying to lock. I don't care if it's ugly, give me anything. Okafor, open every band we've got and put a standard first contact greeting on a loop, math. Then the pointing at ourselves stuff, the whole package. Halloran, weapons stay cold, but I want firing solutions running silent on that contact, and I want them updated every 10 seconds. Reyes, get me a casualty count and a damage board, and find me every soul on this ship who's not fit to stand a post so we know where the holes are." She looked at the smear on the screen. "We hold position. We don't run and we don't close. We sit here and we breathe, and we let them wonder why we haven't rolled over." "And if they escalate?" Reyes asked. "Then we'll have learned something," Vane said. On the command tier of the dreadnought Ossuary, high-taloned Saravast waited for the small ship to open its throat, and was annoyed that it was taking so long. He stood at the lip of the reading well, a pit of black glass sunk into the deck at the ship's heart, and around him the great slow architecture of the V-Horus war machine breathed. The ossuary was a mountain that flew. 9 kilometers of layered ceramic and bonded alloy, its hull grown in the yards over V-Hareth across 2 centuries, its pall emitters banked along its flanks like the ribs of some vast drowned god. It had never been struck. In 4,000 years, no ship of its line had ever been struck, because nothing that saw a ship of its line had ever failed to submit. That was not boast. That was history, recorded, unbroken, the single most reliable fact in the Dominion's long accounting of the galaxy. Saravast was of the high caste, the Talon-born, and like all his caste he carried the pall in his own body as well as in his ship. The dread glands ran in a double chain down either side of his long spine, and even at rest he leaked enough of it that the lesser castes could not meet his eyes. His forearms folded and unfolded in the slow ritual of patience. His crest, the fan of black quills that read a Talon's mood to those who knew how to look, lay flat and easy. "Sensate," he said. "Tell me it has begun." At the far rim of the well, the sensate Ilving crouched over the reading instruments. Ilving was of the reader caste, thin and pale-shelled, her whole life given to the perception of fear in others. Its onset, its texture, the exact moment a species will folded. She had read the submission of 11 worlds. She was, in her narrow and bloodless way, the finest instrument aboard, and Saravast had learned to trust the flatness of her voice. The flatness was not there now. "High Talon," Ilving said, "it has not begun." "Then it is slow. Some species are slow." The mute took a full turn of the glass. "No, High Talon, you misunderstand me." Ilving lifted her narrow head, and the quills around her reading eyes stood up in a way Saravast had never seen. "The pall is landing. I can see it land. Their vessel is bathed in it, full field, close reading, every emitter we have trained on a hull that size, and they are drowning in it. The creatures aboard are afraid. I can read the fear. It is bright, it is real, it is very large." She stopped. "And it is going nowhere." "Explain." "Fear enters. Submission does not follow." Ilving's voice did something Saravast had never heard it do. It thinned at the edge toward wonder or toward horror, he could not tell which. In every species in the record, the two are one thing. The dread rises, the will bows, the throat opens. It is a single motion, High Talon, like water finding the low place. There is no water in the galaxy that climbs. And this, she gestured at the reading, the small hard signature of the human ship holding its station in the dark. This water is not climbing, but it is not falling either. It sits. It holds its own level. They are full of fear, and they are doing nothing about it at all. Saravast came around the well to look at the reading himself, though he could make little of the reader's instruments. The human ship was a splinter against the display, a thing perhaps a fifth of a kilometer long, unarmored by Dominion standards, its drive signature crude, its hull bristling with the ugly external weapons of a young species that had not yet learned to fold its guns inside itself. A destroyer, if the Dominion scouts had classed the type correctly. A patrol boat. A nothing. "It has not run," he said. "No. It has not fired." "No, it holds." And High Talon, Ilving hesitated. "It is watching us. Their sensors are all over us. They are trying very hard to see us and failing because we do not permit it, but they are trying. A creature that has opened its throat does not study the thing it is surrendering to. It cannot. The fear takes the eyes first." She turned her reading face up to him. "This one is measuring us." Somewhere below the command tier, in the signal warrens where the client castes did the ship's low work, an Ale adjutant named Nail heard the order come down through the caste lines and did not, at first, understand it. Nail had been Ale all her life, which was to say she had been afraid all her life. In the specific and total way her people had been afraid for 900 years, since the day the Dominion had come to the Ale homeworld and shown its face, and the whole species had, in the space of an afternoon, opened its throat. She had been born into service the way her mother had, and her mother's mother, aboard the ships of the Talonborn, doing the 10,000 small necessary tasks the high caste would not lower itself to touch. She read signal traffic. She was good at it. Being good at it was the only wall between an ale and the dark, and every ale aboard understood the arithmetic without ever being told. The order that came down was strange. Redirect the deep band arrays. Search the target vessel's transmissions for the submission signal, the standard client acknowledgement, the throat opening rendered into radio. Find it and route it to the command tier the instant it appeared. Nail set the arrays and waited for the signal that always came, and it did not come. Instead, the human ship was shouting. That was the only word she had for it. The little vessel was transmitting on every band at once, loud, deliberate, a great artless flood of signal thrown out into the dark with no encryption and no shame. She caught the shape of it after a few minutes. It was a greeting. A first contact package, prime numbers laid out like stepping stones. Then the hydrogen line, the physics any thinking thing would share. Then crude diagrams, a stick figure of a biped, a star, a third planet, an arrow. Here we are, here is our sun, this is what we look like, we are people. Are you people too? She had processed 1,000 first contacts in the records. She had never seen one where the smaller party, drowning in the pall of a 9-kilometer dreadnought, chose that exact moment to introduce itself politely. Nail's own glands were tight with the second-hand dread that seeped down through the ship whenever the pall ran hot, and her feathers lay slicked flat against her small body, and some deep ale part of her wanted to find a corner and become nothing. That part of her had run her whole life. But another part, a part she did not have a name for, a part she had perhaps never used, leaned toward the signal coming off the human ship and listened, and felt something turn over in her chest that was not fear. She did not route the greeting to the command tier. The order had been to find the submission signal, and there was no submission signal, and so, strictly, there was nothing to route. She told herself that was why. She let the humans' voices flood her arrays, and she listened to a small ship that would not stop talking, and she waited to see what the Talonborn would do when the water refused to climb. "Nothing," Halloran said. "They're not answering, ma'am. We've been shouting our whole first contact package for 11 minutes, and they haven't put a single photon back at us." "They're listening, though," Akafar said. "I'd swear to it. I keep getting a flicker on the deep bands like something on their end sipping at our signal. They hear us. They're just not talking." Vane stood at the center of her bridge with her hands loose at her sides and made herself feel the pressure fully, the way you make yourself look at a wound to know how bad it is. It had not eased. If anything, it had thickened in the last few minutes, and she understood, in a cold, clear part of her mind, that the fear could not reach, that they had noticed she wasn't breaking, and were leaning harder. "They expected something," she said, thinking aloud, keeping her voice up so the bridge could ride it. "This, whatever this pressure is, it's a tool they've used before. A lot. You don't build a weapon this refined for a thing you've only done once. This is a species that's met a lot of other species, and every one of them did something, right about now, that we're not doing, and it's got them confused." "How can you tell they're confused?" Nandakumar asked. Her voice was steadier. She had a lock now, a bad one, but a lock, a smear of mass and heat that she was babysitting like a candle in wind. "Because they've stopped," Vane said. "They came in fast, killed our buoys, put this on us, and then they parked. If we were doing what we were supposed to do, they'd be moving to the next step by now, boarding or talking or shooting. Instead, they're sitting out there running the same play at us harder and getting nothing, and a thing that's confused always does that. It does the failing thing louder." She almost smiled. "We do it too." Rays came back to her with the damage board. Hull integrity nominal, all systems green, reactors happy, no physical contact of any kind. He lowered his voice. "Crew's another story, 9 down and out, 20-some functional but shaky. And Iris Delgado in engineering locked himself in a supply closet and won't come out. Keeps saying there's something in the walls." There is something in the walls, Vane said. It's fear. Get Chief Osai down there. Have her talk to him through the door, not about the thing, just about anything, his kids, the ball game, what he's having for dinner. Give his head something to hold that isn't this. She turned. Nobody's crazy today, Tomas. Everybody feeling this is feeling exactly the right thing. That's the part I need them to hear. You're not broken. You're just outgunned in one specific place, and that place is between your ears, and that's a place we can hold. She had believed things like that her whole career, and had said them less often than she believed them, because a captain who talks too much about courage usually hasn't got much. But the cormorant was a long way from home, past the edge of the maps, with something older and larger than her whole civilization sitting in the dark deciding what to do about her, and words were the cheapest and best weapon she had left, so she spent them. New contact behavior, Nandakumar said sharply. The object, it's changing. The smears, ma'am, it's getting bigger, fast. Closing. No motion on it, it's not coming toward us. The girl's hands flew across the board. I think it's unfolding. Vane looked up at the screen, where the wrongness in the star field had begun, slowly and enormously, to open. Saravast gave the order to show the ship its face because that was doctrine, and because a small hard anger had begun to move in him, and a Talon did not examine his own anger any more than a river examined the slope. Full aspect, he said. Drop the veiling, let them see what they are refusing. Around the ossuary, the stealthing fields that had kept the dreadnought a smear on human sensors folded away, and the ship stood forth into the dark in its full and terrible honesty. This was the oldest instrument in the Dominion's kit, older than the Paul itself, the simple fact of scale. Species that could hold their nerve against an invisible pressure could not, the record showed, hold it against the sight of a mountain that had learned to fly and had come, patiently, for them. The mind that could talk itself past a feeling could not talk itself past 9 kilometers of armored intent unfolding across its entire sky. Somewhere in the deep animal cellar of every thinking thing was a switch marked asterisk too big, run, and the ossuary was built, hull and horn and gun, to throw that switch. They will break now, Saravast said. It was not quite a question. Ilving did not answer for a long moment. She was bent over the well, over the bright hard knot of the human fear, watching it the way a physician watches a heart she has just dosed with something that has always worked. Their fear has spiked, she said at last. Sharply, the sight has hit them. It is high Talon, it is the largest fear response I have ever recorded from a vessel that size. They are terrified, genuinely, wholly terrified. She lifted her head. And they have not moved. They hold their station. Their weapons remain cold. Their transmission continues the greeting, still the greeting, the numbers and the little figure of themselves. They looked at the thing in the cellar that says run, high Talon, and they read it and they set it down and they went on introducing themselves. Saravast's crest rose off his neck for the first time. In the language of his caste, that was a thing not shown in public. A thing a Talon suppressed the way a lesser creature suppressed a scream, and every reader caste and client caste being on the command tier saw it rise and felt the cold go through them, because if a Talonborn was afraid, then the order of the universe had come loose at a corner. That is not possible, Saravast said. I am the instrument that tells you what is possible, Ilving said, very quietly, and I am telling you it is happening. The unfolding took 90 seconds, and Iris Vane spent every one of them making sure her crew watched it with her. Eyes up, she said. Everybody look at it. Don't look away from it. Don't look at your boards, look at the thing. Because she had learned in 20 years of hard places that the imagination builds a worse monster in the dark than the eyes ever find in the light, and the surest way to hand a frightened person to their own panic was to let them stare at a wall and picture what was behind it. So she made them look, and the thing that unfolded across their sky was, she would admit later, close to the worst thing a human eye could be asked to hold. It was the size of a mountain range. That was the only comparison her mind would offer, not a ship, A geography. A thing with the mass of moons, layered and terraced and ridged, its flanks running with long banks of dark ports that she did not think were windows. It had no grace in it anywhere. It was not built to be looked at. It was built to be survived, and mostly not. Where the cormorant had lines, curves, the compromises of a small ship that had to be fast, this thing had only accumulation, plate laid over plate over plate, a patience made physical, as if its makers had never once in its building had to choose between armor and anything else. Mass estimate now reads Nandakumar stopped. It doesn't read, ma'am, it just says more. The scale tops out and it keeps going. Kilometers. 9 maybe more, where the girl laughed a small cracked sound. We're a rounding error, Captain. We are, Vane agreed. Halloran, is it powering weapons? Can't tell. Everything on that hull reads like a weapon, and none of it reads like it's charging. If it wants to shoot us, I don't think it has to warm up. I think it just decides. There it was, the true fear, the clean one, cutting through the manufactured pressure like a blade through smoke. Vane found she was almost grateful for it. The pall was a lie told to her nervous system. This was the truth, and the truth she could work with. That thing could end them with a thought. It had shown them the pressure first, and now it had shown them the size, and in the grammar of what it was doing she could read the sentence plain. This is who you are dealing with. Now do the thing every other creature does. They keep raising the bid, she said, half to herself. Pressure, then scale. They're running down a list, and every item on the list is supposed to make us fold, and none of them have. So they're getting to the bottom of the list. She turned to raise. How long until we can jump? Drive spun. 90 seconds to a safe fold, less if you want an unsafe one. Hold it ready. Don't spin it down, but we don't run first. She saw the question in his face and answered it before he asked. Because a thing that's spent 4,000 years watching everyone run is very, very good at chasing. Running is the one behavior they've completely mastered. The instant we bolt, we become the thing they already know how to kill. As long as we sit here and do what nobody's ever done, they have to think, and they are not built to think, they're built to be obeyed, and I would rather fight the part of them that has to think than the part of them that's had 4,000 years of practice. She looked back at the mountain filling her sky. Akafar, change the transmission, stop the greeting. Ma'am. They've heard it, they understand it, I'd bet money. Time for the second thing you say in a first contact. She was quiet a moment, choosing. Send this, plain language, slow, repeated. We see you. We are not going to attack you. We are also not going to leave, and we are not going to surrender. We would like to talk. If you fire on us, we will fire back, and we know what that costs us, and we are prepared to pay it. The choice of what happens next is yours. She paused. Then add our registry. Ship name, my name, where we're from. Names, Akafar. You give somebody your name when you're not afraid of them knowing it. Akafar's hands moved, sending. And Priya, put every scan we've got on that thing and record all of it. Continuous dump to the black box every 10 seconds. Whatever happens to us, somebody back home is going to want to know exactly what this was. You think we're not making it home, Nandakumar said. It wasn't quite a question either. Vane looked at the girl, 26, 3 years out of the academy, good hands and a soft heart, and a long life that ought to have been in front of her, and gave her the truth, because the girl had earned it, and because a lie now would cost more than it bought. I think we're a long way past the maps, she said, and I think the smart money's been against us since the buoys went dark, but smart money's been wrong about us before. That's kind of our whole story as a species if you read it end to end. So no, Ensign, I don't think we're not making it home. I just think we're going to have to be very hard to kill for a while, and I have never once seen this crew be easy to kill. She raised her voice for the room. Log entry, all hands, captain speaking. We have made first contact with an unknown power of overwhelming force. We are holding station at the Karsh Verge. We have offered peace and we have refused surrender. Whatever they do next, this crew has already done the hard part, which was to look at the biggest thing any of us will ever see and not blink. Hold your posts. Hold your nerve. We hold. In the signal warrens, Nail listened to the humans change their song. She had the language now. The ship's translation engines had been chewing the human transmission since the greeting began, and AIL signal adjutants were permitted, even expected, to run the client-level decrypts. And so, she heard the new message not as noise but as words, and the words did something to her that no signal in 900 years of AIL service had ever done. We are not going to surrender. She played it again. She was not supposed to. The arrays were tasked to the command tier's needs, and an AIL who spent ship time on her own curiosity was an AIL inviting notice, and notice was the beginning of every bad thing that could happen to one of her cast. But she played it again anyway, the human captain's voice run through the translator into flat Dominion phonemes, and then she found the raw recording underneath the translation, and played that, the actual sound of the actual creature, a low, steady voice, unhurried, a little rough, saying words Nail could not understand in their own shape but whose meaning she now carried like a stone in her hand. We know what it costs us, and we are prepared to pay it. Nail had a memory she had never told anyone, because there was no one to tell and nothing to be gained by telling. When she was very young, before service, her grandsire had described to her the day the Dominion came to the AIL homeworld. He had been young himself, and he had stood in a great crowd in the capital as the sky filled with the shape of a Talon ship, and he had felt the pall come down like a tide, and he had watched every AIL around him sink to the ground and open their throats in the submission display, the ancient gesture their bodies made without asking their minds, and he had opened his own throat too, and hated himself for it, and done it anyway, because the alternative was a thing his body would not let him choose. There was no choosing, he had told her. That is what you must understand, small one. It was not that we were cowards. It was that the choice was taken out of us. The fear came, and there was no room left inside for anything else. She had believed him. Every AIL believed him, because every AIL had felt the pall and knew that he was right, that when the dread came all the way down there was no room left for choosing. That submission was not a decision but a fact of the flesh, like falling. And 200,000 kilometers off the ossuary's bow, a ship a fraction of their size sat in the full flood of the pall and the full sight of the aspect and was, right now, choosing. Nail sat very still in the warm dark of her station and understood for the first time in her life that her grandsire had been wrong, not lying, wrong. The choice had not been taken out of the AIL. The choice had always been there. It had simply never once, in 900 years, occurred to a single one of them that it could be reached for, because the fear filled the whole sky, and no one had ever seen another creature reach past it. She was seeing it now. Her feathers, which had lain flat and slicked with dread since the pall first ran hot, lifted a little, all along her arms, and she did not understand the feeling and had no word for it, because it was not a feeling her people had made words for. It would be a long time before she learned that the humans had a word, and that the word was *hope, and that they considered it of all their many strange possessions, the most dangerous one they owned. It answered, Ilving said. Saravast turned from the display, the client signal. It has opened. No. The sensate's flat voice had gone very careful, the way a voice goes careful around something that might break. Not the submission signal, a message, in language. Their translation engines and ours are close enough now that I have the sense of it. She hesitated, and Saravast understood that the hesitation was itself the report, that whatever the small ship had said had made even the reader cast unwilling to say it aloud on the command tier where the client casts could hear. They see us. They will not attack us, they will not leave, they will not surrender, they wish to talk, and if we fire on them, Ilving stopped. Say it. They will fire back. They say they know what it will cost them and that they are prepared to pay it. And they have given us their names. The command tier had gone silent. Even the slow machine breath of the ossuary seemed to have paused, though that was only Saravast's own blood, loud in his hearing membranes. The Talonborn did not, as a rule, feel the thing they spent their lives inflicting. The pall ran out of them and never back in. That was the whole gift and curse of their caste. But something was moving in Saravast now that had the shape of the thing his glands made, turned around and pointed the wrong way. And he did not have a name for it because his people had spent 4,000 years making very sure they would never need one. Names, he repeated. The ship is called Cormorant. Their commander is called Vane. They come from a world they call Earth on the far side of the Verge, in a small union of worlds they call the Reach. They have offered these facts freely, unencrypted, to the ship that could unmake them with a word. Ilvain looked up at him, and her reading eyes, which had witnessed the fall of 11 worlds, held something he had never seen in them. High Talon, in the whole of the record, every world, every fleet, every species the Dominion has ever met, no one has ever given us their name before they gave us their throat. The name comes after. It comes with the surrender when they are ours and it no longer matters what they were called. This ship has given us the name of a thing that still belongs to itself. Saravast looked out at the splinter in the dark, holding its station, small and cold and utterly unbowed, and for the first time in his long command, he did not know what the doctrine required of him, because the doctrine had never once anticipated this, because in 4,000 years there had never been a need. "Bring me the second," he said, "and seal the command tier. What happens here does not go down the caste lines until I say it does." He was too late for that, though he did not know it. The signal had already gone down. An Ale adjutant in the Warrens had already heard a human refuse to be afraid, and had already begun, in the small private dark of her own skull, to do the one thing the Dominion had built its entire order to prevent. She had begun to wonder. The second came up onto the command tier trailing the cold that always came off him, and Saravast felt his own crest want to flat and would not let it. The second's name was Odith, and he was everything a Talonborn was supposed to be, and Saravast, in his private accounting, was not quite. Pure of line, patient past the point of cruelty, a creature who had never in Saravast's long knowledge of him done a single thing that could not be justified by the doctrine. Odith had been placed aboard the ossuary by the conquered throne, and everyone from the high caste down to the lowest Ale understood what a second was for. A second was the throne's reminder that a high Talon commanded at the throne's pleasure and could stop commanding at the throne's displeasure, and that the distance between the two was exactly one report. Odith carried heavier dread glands than Saravast did. It was not an accident that the throne chose its watchers so. "You sealed the tier," Odith said. "The throne does not love a sealed tier, High Talon. There is a situation the doctrine does not cover." "There is no such situation." Odith said it the way another creature might say the sun rises, a statement of the order of things. "The doctrine covers the galaxy. That is what the doctrine is." He moved to the well and looked down at the reading, and Saravast watched him do the arithmetic that Saravast had already done, and watched, with a small hard satisfaction he was careful to keep off his crest, the exact moment the arithmetic failed to come out. "The vessel is in full paw," Odith said slowly. "Yes." "At close reading, full aspect revealed." "Yes." "And it holds." Odith's voice did not thin the way Ilvain's had, it hardened. "Then the reading is faulty. The sensate has erred, recalibrate and read again." "I do not err," Ilvain said from the rim of the well. She said it without heat, which was the only way anyone ever contradicted a second and lived. "The instruments are sound. I have read the fall of 11 worlds through these same instruments, second, and the throne accepted every reading. If they were sound then, they are sound now. The vessel holds. There is no error. There is only a thing that has not happened before." "There is no such thing," Odith said again, and Saravast understood, watching him, that this was not stubbornness. It was deeper than stubbornness. It was the foundation. A second could not admit the possibility of a species that would not break, because the Dominion did not have an army in the sense that younger, cruder powers had armies. It had a threat, perfected across 4,000 years, and a threat is only as good as the certainty behind it. The ossuary's guns had not been fired in anger in 3 centuries. The last time a Talon ship had actually needed to destroy a defiant world, the ships had been different, the crews had been different, the doctrine had been young, and the certainty had not yet had time to calcify into the single unquestioned fact on which the whole Dominion now rested. They always break. Every world the Dominion held, it held because the peoples on it believed, in their flesh, that resistance was not a thing that could be done. 200 species, 10,000 worlds. All of it standing on one sentence, and a splinter of a ship at the edge of the maps had just, quietly and without firing a shot, put a crack in it. "Destroy it," Odith said, "now before the reading spreads." "The reading has already spread," Ilvin said. "The client casts route our deep band traffic. An ale in the Warrens has already carried the human transmission and knows what it says. You cannot destroy a ship fast enough to unspeak a thing that has already been spoken aboard your own hull. Second." Odith turned on her and his crest came up, and the dread came off him in a wave that Saravast felt even through his own cast's immunity. A pressure aimed not at a distant enemy but at the reader-cast woman 3 paces away. And Ilvain bowed her head, not the throat opening, but the lesser gesture, the one that kept a reader-cast breathing, and did not take back a word. "You will not lecture me on the throne's order," Odith said. "I will report to you the shape of the reality you are standing in," Ilvain said to the deck. "That is what a sensate is for. You may do with the reality whatever the doctrine tells you, but I will not pretend the reality is other than it is, because a false reading is the one thing that has never come off my instruments, and I am too old to begin now." Saravast let the silence hold a moment. Then he said quietly, "We will not destroy it yet." Odith's reading eyes came to him. "Consider what the second himself has said," Saravast went on, and he chose each word the way a creature chooses its footing on ice. "The reading has spread. If we destroy the ship now, we destroy it in front of the whole ship's company, having failed to break it. The record will show a Talon ship that could not make a splinter open its throat and so silenced it with guns. That is not a threat, second. That is a confession. Every ale in the Warrens, every client cast on every deck, will carry down the cast lines and out into the Dominion the news that the Paul failed and the Talonborn had to fall back on the crude thing, the loud thing. The thing that admits the Paul was never the whole of our power but only the best of it. No, we will not hand them that." He let his crest settle, deliberate, a Talon in command of himself. "We will make it open its throat. We will find the level of pressure at which this creature breaks, because every creature breaks, and we will demonstrate to the whole company that the doctrine holds, that it was only slow, that the crack was a thing they misread. And then, when it has bowed, we will decide whether it lives." It was a good answer. It was, Saravast thought, exactly the answer the doctrine wanted, dressed in the doctrine's own robes, and Odith could not argue with it without arguing against the thing he was aboard to protect. He watched the second weigh it and find no purchase, and felt the small cold satisfaction again, and beneath the satisfaction, where he did not look, the other thing moved. The thing shaped like his own glands turned inward, because Saravast had just committed the ossuary to a course whose only certainty was that a species which would not break under the full pawl and the full aspect was now going to be pushed harder, and Saravast did not actually know, for the first time in his command. What waited at the bottom of that? "Raise the pawl," he said, "to combat threshold. And hold." Combat threshold was a thing the ossuary had not run in Saravast's lifetime, because nothing had ever required it. It was the level built for the founding wars, the level meant to break not a frightened crew but a defiant fleet, and when the sensate spoke the order down into the emitter banks, the whole 9 kilometers of the dreadnought seemed to lean. Aboard the Cormorant, it hit like a tide turning to a wall. Iris Vane felt it come and heard, before she felt anything else, The sound her crew made, not screams, worse than screams. A low collective sound like a room full of people who have all, at the same instant, understood that they are going to die. Nandakumar went off her chair and onto the deck. Halloran's hands came off the tactical board and covered his head, the old animal move, the one Vane had told them all about an hour ago, and which none of them could stop their bodies from making now. Akafar was weeping without seeming to know it, tears running down into his collar, his hands still moving on the comms board out of pure trained habit while the rest of him came apart. And Vane felt the wall hit her and felt herself start to go, felt the thing in the animal cellar of her skull throw itself against the door. And she did the only thing she had ever known how to do with a fear too big to master, which was to make it small by giving it a job. "On your feet," she said, and her voice cracked, and she let it crack and kept going. "On your feet, all of you right now, that's an order. You feel that? That's the biggest thing they've got. That's the bottom of the list. There's nothing under this. They just showed us the bottom of the list and we are still here." She got a hand under Nandakumar's arm and hauled, and the girl came up shaking, and Vane put her back in her chair and put her hands on the board and held them there. "Priya, give me a reading on their emitters. Right now. Work." I can't." "You can, you're doing it. Your hands are on the board." "Read me the emitters." And the girl, weeping, terrified, 26 years old and a rounding error against a 9-kilometer god, read her the emitters, because her captain had asked her to, and because a task is a rope thrown to a drowning mind, and her voice steadied one word at a time as the work took the weight the fear had been carrying. Outputs up, way up. Whatever they were doing before, they just tripled it. This is Captain, this reading doesn't match any weapon profile in the book. It's not directed energy, it's not gravitic, it's structured. It's shaped. They're broadcasting something shaped. Shaped like what? Nandakumar was quiet a moment, wrestling the data. "Like a mind," she said finally, and her voice was very small. "It's shaped like the inside of a mind. It's not hitting the ship, Captain. It's a key. It's cut to fit a lock, and the lock is us." Vane looked at that reading over the girl's shoulder and understood, all at once and completely, what she was fighting. "It's fear," she said. "They've weaponized fear, not a fear of anything. Just the raw thing, the animal thing, cut and shaped and broadcast to fit the lock every thinking creature carries around in the back of its skull." She straightened slowly. "That's how they do it. That's how a thing that big has never had to fight. They don't beat you. They reach into the oldest part of you, the part that ran from the dark before your ancestors had hands, and they turn it all the way up. And every species they've ever met has done exactly what that part of them screamed to do." Her mouth was dry. She wet it. "Which means every species they've ever met has lost the fight without throwing a punch." "So what do we do?" Reyes had come to her side. He was gray, sweating, upright by will alone. "How do we fight fear, Iris?" Vane looked at her bridge, at Nandakumar weeping over a working board, at Akafar's steady hands and streaming face, at Halloran hauling himself back into his chair with his jaw clenched so hard she could hear it, and something settled in her that was not calm exactly, but was on the far side of fear, the way a swimmer who has stopped fighting the current finds a cold, clear place from which to think. "We don't fight it," she said. "You can't fight it, it's coming from inside the house. So we do the only thing our whole miserable, ugly, stubborn species has ever known how to do with a fear we can't fight." She keyed the all hands. "We're afraid and we work anyway. That's the entire trick. That's 4 million years of us in one sentence. We are afraid and we work anyway. Every hand to a post. Do your job while you're terrified. Do it badly if you have to, but do it. Because the thing out there has never once seen a creature keep working after the fear went all the way down, and I want to be there when it figures out that's what we are." Ilvain's hands had gone still over the reading instruments. "Report," Saravas said. She did not answer at once. On the display, the human vessel's fear signature had bloomed to a size she had never recorded, a white blaze of animal terror at combat threshold. and Saravast had leaned toward it, expecting at last to see the thing he had waited an hour for, the bloom collapsing inward as the will folded, the blaze guttering down into the small gray flat reading of a broken thing, the throat opening at last. The blaze was not collapsing. The blaze was holding at maximum, and laced through it, impossibly, running steady beneath the terror like a keel beneath a storm, was something else, a second signal, ordered, disciplined, purposeful, that had not been there before, and that grew stronger the harder the paw pushed. "High Talon," Ilvin said, and her flat voice had passed all the way through wonder and out the other side into something Saravast realized, with a slow, cold turning, was fear of her own. "They are more afraid than any creature I have ever read. The pall has reached the very bottom of them. There is nothing lower for it to reach. And they are—" She stopped, started again. "There is a second thing in the reading now. It rose when the terror rose. The more afraid they become, the stronger it grows. I do not have a name for it. It is not courage as the record describes courage. Courage in the record is the absence of fear, the reading where the dread never lands. This is not that. The dread has landed. The dread is total, and they have set it to work. They are using it. The fear is the fuel, High Talon. We are not breaking them. We are—" her reading eyes came up to his, huge and pale— "we are feeding them." The command tier was silent. Odith stood at the well with his crest flat and rigid, and for the first time in the years Saravast had known him, the second had nothing to say, because the doctrine had no word for a creature that grew stronger the harder you frightened it. And a Talonborn who has spent his whole life as the most frightening thing in every room he enters has no defense at all against the one creature in the galaxy that has learned to eat fear and stand. Saravast did a thing then that no High Talon had done in the memory of the ship, and that he could not, afterward, fully explain even to himself. He opened a channel to the human vessel. It broke doctrine so completely that Odith actually stepped back from the well, the way a creature steps back from a thing that has begun, unaccountably, to burn. The Talonborn did not speak to the lesser species. That was the whole architecture of the thing. The paw came down, the throat opened, and only then, when the creature was already the Dominion's property, did any Viharis lower himself to issue instruction. To open a voice channel to a vessel that had not surrendered to speak to it as though it were owed a voice, was to concede, in the single act, the one thing the doctrine could never concede, that the thing on the other end was a party and not a possession. Saravast opened the channel anyway, because he had understood something in the last few minutes that the doctrine had not equipped him to survive, and it was this. The small ship was not going to break, and every moment he spent proving otherwise was a moment the whole company watched the doctrine fail, and the only move left that was not either surrender or slaughter was the one move the Dominion had spent 4,000 years making sure it would never need. He had to talk to it. He had to find out what it was. Because you could not threaten a thing you did not understand, and for the first time in the Dominion's history, there was a thing it did not understand sitting at the edge of its own space, unbowed, giving out its name. "Human vessel," he said, and the translation engines carried his voice across the dark in the flat phonemes of the human tongue. "This is the High Talon Saravast, commanding the Dominion warship Ossuary. You have not opened your throat." On the Cormorant's bridge, the alien voice came through the speakers, and every head came up. It was not what Vane had expected. She had braced for something vast and inhuman, a chorus, a machine drone, the voice of the mountain itself. What came through instead was a single voice, dry and precise, its cadences strange but its meaning clear, and threaded under the strangeness she heard, she would have sworn to it, the thing she had been waiting an hour to hear. She heard that it did not know what to do. "They're talking to us," Akefer breathed. "Captain, they opened a channel, two-way. They want to talk." "I heard." Vane crossed to the comm station. Her legs were not entirely steady. The combat threshold pawl still ran over the ship like surf, and every human aboard was holding on by the rope of a task. But a channel was a task, and the biggest one yet. "Put me on it. Same band, plain audio." You sure you don't want to run it through protocol? Get the Diplo package. No package, me. She stood at the station and took a breath and spoke and made her voice do the one thing it had to do, which was to sound like a person who was not afraid, whatever the truth of her ran underneath. High Talon Saravast, this is Captain Iris Vane commanding the Reach Destroyer Cormorant. No, we have not opened our throat. We don't do that. A pause across 200,000 kilometers. Then, every species does that. Not this one. You are afraid. The alien voice held no cruelty in it, which somehow made it worse. It was simply stating a reading, the way a doctor states a temperature. I am told you are more afraid than any creature my instruments have ever measured. The fear has reached the bottom of you, and still you have not bowed. I do not understand what I am looking at, Captain Vane, and I have commanded this ship for a long time. Explain it to me. Vane looked at her bridge, at the weeping, working, unbroken people who crewed her ship, and she gave the mountain the truth, because a lie now would be smelled out by a creature that had spent 4,000 years reading the exact chemistry of other minds, and because the truth, she had begun to suspect, was the most frightening thing she owned. We're afraid all the time, she said. That's the thing you don't understand because I don't think your instrument can read it. We didn't evolve without fear. We evolved buried in it. We came up on a hard world full of things bigger and faster and stronger than us, with teeth we didn't have and speed we couldn't match, and the only thing we had, the only edge, the single trick that got us off that world and out here to meet you, is that we learned to be afraid and keep walking toward the thing anyway. We don't turn the fear off, High Talon. We can't. We just stopped letting it decide. Every one of us on this ship is terrified right now, and every one of us is at their post. That's not the absence of fear, that's what we built on top of it. She paused. You've spent a long time being the most frightening thing anybody ever saw, I understand that, but you've been meeting species that fear was new to. Fear isn't new to us. Fear is home. You didn't bring us anything out here we didn't already carry up out of the mud 1,000,000 years ago. You just turned it up. And we know exactly what to do when the fear turns up because we've been doing it since before we could talk. We work. We hold. We do not bow. The channel was silent for a long moment. Then Saravas said, quietly, You are describing a species that cannot be governed. We can be talked to, Vane said. We came out here to lay buoys and shake hands. We'd still rather shake hands, but governed, no. I'll be honest with you since we're being honest. We've never even managed to govern each other. You're not going to be the ones who crack it. Nail heard the exchange from the Warrens, and her small hands were shaking, and it was not the paw. She had done a forbidden thing. When the human captain began to speak, Nail had opened a private thread on the client band, a thing an ALE adjutant was permitted to do for maintenance, for the endless dull traffic of the ship's low work, and she had begun, quietly, to translate the exchange not into the flat Dominion phonemes the command tier heard but into ALE, into the soft feathered speech of her own people, and she had begun, quietly, to route it down the client lines, to the other ALE, to the mute stokers in the drive corps, to the Suhil who tended the water, to every client caste being aboard the ossuary who had, like her, opened their throat 900 or 9,000 years ago and believed in their flesh that it had never been a choice. She told herself it was traffic, maintenance, the endless dull necessary chatter of the low decks. She knew it was not. She knew, with a clarity that frightened her more than the Paul ever had, that she was carrying a fire down through the belly of a Talon ship, and that if a reader or a second caught the shape of it, she would be open throat to tail in front of the whole Warren as an example. She rooted it anyway. She could not have said why. Except that she had heard a small creature drowning in the same tide that had drowned her whole people tell a High Talon we do not bow, and she found that she could not keep that to herself, that it was too large to hold in one ale chest, that it wanted out the way water wants down, and that for the first time in 900 years, an ale aboard a Talon ship had found a thing inside herself that pushed the other way. On the client lines, the low decks went very quiet, not the quiet of fear. Nail had lived her whole life inside the quiet of fear and knew its texture the way she knew her own feathers. This was a different quiet. This was the quiet of 2,000 client-cast beings, on 100 decks, all listening to the same small, impossible voice at the same moment, and all of them, for the first time, wondering the same forbidden thing. Second, Odith's voice was very level. You are recording all of this. The ship records everything, Saravas said. He had closed the channel to the human ship a moment before, and he stood at the well with his crest carefully flat, and he knew what was coming, had known since he opened the channel, had perhaps opened the channel partly to make it come. Then the throne will hear it. The throne will hear a high talon of the Dominion asking a client vessel to explain itself, begging a splinter for its philosophy. Odith came around the well, and the dread rolled off him, aimed now at Saravas, talon glands against talon glands, the private war of the high caste that no lesser being was ever meant to witness. You have handed them a voice. You have made them a party. You have conceded on the record in front of the whole company that there exists a thing the Dominion must reason with rather than break. Do you understand what you have done, Saravas? You have not lost a battle. There has been no battle. You have lost the only thing we have. You have lost the certainty. The certainty was already lost, Saravas said. It was lost the moment the pawl reached the bottom of them and they held. I did not lose it. I found out it was gone. There is a difference, though I grant the throne will not care for it. The throne will care for nothing but the result. Odith drew himself up, and the quills of his crest stood out full, and Saravas understood that the second was about to do the thing a second was aboard to do, the thing that ended high talons. I am invoking the throne's authority. As of this moment I relieve you of the ossuary. You will stand down from the well. The doctrine will be restored. This vessel will open its throat or it will be destroyed, and the record will show that a second corrected a high talon's error before it spread, and the certainty will be repaired with the only mortar that has ever repaired it, which is the ash of the defiant. He turned to the emitter cast. Bring the guns to bear. Full spinal battery. We will not frighten this thing further. We will end it, and we will end the reading it has spread. And by the time the story reaches the throne, it will be a story of a splinter that dared and was ash within the hour. And Saravas, who had commanded the ossuary for longer than the second had been aboard, who had felt the thing turn over in his own chest when a small ship gave out its name, who had understood in the last hour that everything he had been certain of was a wall with nothing behind it. Saravas looked at Odith and made a choice of his own, the first true choice, perhaps, that he had made in his long, obedient life. No, he said. For a heartbeat the two Talon-born faced each other across the reading well, and the whole command tier held still, because a thing was happening that the ship had no ritual for. You cannot refuse a second's invocation, Odith said. The authority is the throne's. You are refusing the throne. I'm refusing to fire the spinal battery at a target the whole company has watched us fail to break, Saravas said. Think, Odith. You are so full of the doctrine you have stopped doing the one thing the doctrine was ever for, which is to keep the Dominion standing. We have not fired those guns in anger in 300 years. Do you know why? Because we have never needed to. The pawl has always been enough. The threat has always been enough. And a threat is a strange kind of weapon. It works perfectly right up until the moment you use it, and then, if it fails, you have nothing. If we fire on that ship and it dies quietly, we have shown the company that the pawl was never the whole of us, only the best of us. And if we fire on that ship and it does not die quietly, if a splinter that has already refused to break also refuses to burn on the first shot, then we have shown the company something so much worse that I do not have a word for it either. He held the second's reading eyes. You want to repair the certainty with ash, but the certainty was never in the guns, Odith. It was in the belief that the guns would never be needed. The moment we need them, the certainty is already dead, and all the ash in the galaxy will not bring it back. It was, Saravas thought distantly, the truest thing he had ever said, and it changed nothing, because Odith was not a creature who could be reached by truth, only by the throne, and the throne had made him for exactly this. "You have said enough to end you 3 times over," Odith said. "I will see that the record carries all of it." He turned from Saravast to the emitter cast, and the dread came off him in a wall that put half the client cast on the tier onto the deck, and he spoke the words that only a Talonborn could speak and that no Talonborn had spoken in 3 centuries. "Spinal battery. Acquire the human vessel. Fire on my mark." The emitter cast did not move. It was a small thing, and it lasted less than a breath, and afterward Saravast was never sure the whole company understood what they had seen. The emitter cast were client cast, mute mostly, broad, slow, patient beings bred to the guns, and for the whole of the Dominion's history, a client cast being had done what a Talonborn said in the instant he said it, because the fear did not permit a gap between the order and the hand. But there was a gap now. It was the width of a heartbeat. And into that heartbeat-wide gap Saravast watched something he had never seen pour like light through a crack. The mute gunner's broad hands hesitating over the fire controls, his slow eyes going, for one forbidden instant, to Saravast rather than to Odith, as if there were a choice, as if an order were a thing that could be weighed, as if somewhere down the client lines a small voice had been whispering all this while that the fear was not a law, but only a very old habit. Then Odith's dread doubled, and the gap closed, and the mute's hands came down on the fire controls, because a habit 900 years deep does not break in a single heartbeat, however much light gets into the crack. The spinal battery of the ossuary fired for the first time in 300 years. "Incoming," Halloran's voice cracked across the bridge. "Massive energy spike, spinal mount, it's Captain, brace, BR." Vane had a half-second. She spent it on the only order that mattered. "Hard skew all thrust now." The cormorant threw herself sideways. She was a destroyer, small and crude by Dominion reckoning, but small and crude also meant light and fast, and Ada Ferris on the helm had her hands on the yoke when the order came and did not wait for it to finish, rolling the ship off her station with everything the drives had, and the lance that had been cut for the center of the human hull went instead across her flank. It was not a clean miss. Nothing about it was clean. The beam, if it was a beam, the sensors never did agree on what it was, walked down the cormorant's port side and took the forward sensor mast, 3-point defense turrets, and a 40-meter section of outer hull with it. And the ship screamed. A real sound, structural, the shriek of a vessel losing a piece of herself. And the deck bucked and the lights died and came back red and the air filled with the smell of burning insulation and the specific electric stink of a hull breach sealing itself in a hurry. Damage. Vane was on her feet, one hand on the command rail, blood running from where she'd bitten through her lip. "Talk to me." Port sensor mast gone, 3 PD turrets gone, hull breach on decks 4 and 5 sealed, were venting atmosphere from a dozen small rays was reading off the board with the flat, fast cadence of a man doing the most important thing he would ever do. "We've got casualties forward, medical's calling it, I don't have numbers yet. Drives are good, reactors good, main guns good." He looked up. "Iris, they shot us. They actually shot us." "I know they did." Vane wiped the blood off her mouth with the back of her hand. Her whole body was singing with terror and with something else now, something hard and bright and very old, the thing that had come up out of the mud with her ancestors and had never once in 4 million years learned the good sense to lie down. Halloran. Firing solution on that spinal mount, the one that just fired. You've had it running silent for an hour. Is it good? Halloran stared at her. "Captain, that's a 9-kilometer capital ship. We are a destroyer. We put every jewel we have into that hull and we scratch the paint." "I didn't ask you to kill it. I asked you if the solution's good." He looked at his board. "It's good. Main gun, both rail batteries, full spread. I can put everything on that spinal mount's emitter housing. But Captain, when we fire, we stop being a thing they're confused about, and we start being a thing they're angry at. And there is nothing between us and the next shot but luck, and we already spent most of the luck we." They already fired, Bex. Vane's voice was quiet now, and it carried the length of the bridge in the red-lit dark. They already made us a thing they're angry at. That choice is behind us. It was theirs and they made it. The only choice left in front of us is whether the thing they're angry at hits back or dies with its hands over its head. And I did not come 4 million years up out of the dark to die with my hands over my head, and neither did you, and neither did anybody on this ship. She looked at the mountain filling her cracked and smoking sky. They've never been hit. 4,000 years, that reader said, and nothing has ever landed a blow on one of these things because nothing ever got past the fear. Well, we're past the fear. We've been past it for an hour. Let's introduce ourselves properly. She straightened. All batteries, target that emitter housing. Fire. The cormorant hit the ossuary at 09:14 ship time, and the whole of the Dominion's 4,000-year history divided, cleanly and forever, into before and after. The main gun was a spinal railgun, the destroyer's one true weapon, a slug of dense metal thrown at a fraction of light speed, and the rail batteries threw a spread of smaller slugs to bracket it, and Halloran put all of it on a spot the size of a city on the flank of a thing the size of a mountain range. Against the ossuary's mass it was nothing. Against the ossuary's armor, plate laid over plate over plate, the patience of 2 centuries made physical, it should have been nothing. And it was not nothing because Halloran had not fired at the armor. He had fired at the emitter housing, the great dark port from which the spinal paw lance had come, which had opened to fire and had not yet fully closed, and the human slug went in through the open port, and into the soft mechanism behind it, the delicate, enormous machinery of the weapon that had never in 300 years expected to be shot back at. The emitter housing came apart. Not the ship barely noticed, would log it as minor, would be structurally sound in every meaningful way. But a plume of fire and venting atmosphere and tumbling debris blew out of the ossuary's flank, a wound 40 meters across, glowing, spewing, unmistakable, and for the first time since the founding wars, a Talon ship of the Dominion bled where the whole galaxy could see. On the command tier the alarms began, and Saravast had never heard them, because no one aboard had ever heard them, because they were the alarms for a thing that did not happen. "Hull breach," the emittercast chief said, and his slow voice had gone high and strange. "Spinal emitter, portside. It is high Talon, it is destroyed. The housing is gone. We are venting. We have been struck. We have been struck." He said it twice because the words did not fit in his mouth. Struck, the ossuary. Saravast looked at the damage reading blooming red on the great display, at the plume of the ship's own fire and air pouring out into the dark, and he felt the thing in his chest that he had no word for turn all the way over and become, at last, recognizable, because it was the thing his glands made, the thing he had spent his whole life pushing into other creatures, and it had found its way home. It was fear, his own, for the first time in his life. And across the command tier, and down the cast lines, and through the warrens and the drive cores and the water decks, 2,000 client-cast beings felt the ship shudder with a wound, and heard the alarms that had never sounded, and understood, all in the same instant, the thing that Nail had been whispering down the client lines for the past hour. The mountain could bleed. Odith's roar filled the command tier, not a word, not an order, a raw sound out of the founding age, the sound of a Talonborn whose universe has been broken in front of him. And then he was at the fire controls himself, 4 arms driving the mute gunner aside, and the ossuary answered its own wound the only way the doctrine had left it able to answer anything. "All batteries," Odith said, and his voice had gone past command into something wet and personal. "Every gun that bears, reduce it to vapor, now." This time there was no channel, no reading, no patience. The flank of the ossuary lit along a 2-kilometer stretch as scores of secondary weapons woke for the first time in centuries and reached across the dark for the splinter that had dared to bleed them. Aboard the cormorant, Iris Vane watched her death come and did not look away from it. "Evasive, everything you've got," she said, and Ferris was already throwing the ship, but there was only so much a wounded destroyer could do against the broadside of a mountain, and most of what came at them they could not dodge. The first salvo walked across the void where they had been. The second did not miss. The Cormorant took 3 hits in as many seconds, the aft rail battery, gone. The number 2 reactor, scrammed and dumped before it could take the ship with it. A clean punch through the dorsal hull that opened the aft crew compartments to space and killed 9 people between one breath and the next, and Vane felt every one of them go, not as data, but as a subtraction, as the ship growing smaller around her. "We've lost the aft third," Reyes said. He had a gash across his scalp and blood in one eye, and he read the dying ship off the board with the same flat cadence, because it was the last useful thing he could do, and he was going to do it well. "Aft rail battery gone. Number 2 reactor offline. Decks 8 through 11 open to vacuum blast doors holding at frame 90. We've got," his voice caught once and steadied, "we've got a lot of people back there we're not getting back, Iris. Forward still tight. Main guns still good. Forward rails still good. We can still shoot. We just can't take much more of that. Then we make what we've got count." Vane keyed the all hands, and her voice went out to every compartment still holding air. "This is the captain. We've been hit hard and we're going to get hit again, and I'm not going to lie to you about where this ends for a lot of us. But listen to me. We have done the impossible thing today. We made that mountain bleed. 4,000 years and nobody ever laid a hand on one of those, and we did it with a destroyer and a bad attitude, and the whole galaxy that's watching just learned that these things can be hurt. That knowledge doesn't die with us. It's already out. We already threw it, and it's already flying, and it's going to land in places we'll never see. So whatever happens to this ship in the next few minutes, we already won the only fight that mattered. We already changed the number. Now we're just going to make them pay full price for the rest of it. Every gun that bears. Hold your posts. Hold your nerve." "We hold." Nail felt the second reactor die 200,000 kilometers away. Felt it in the reading. The human ship's power signature guttering to 2/3, and then holding, refusing to go out. And she found that she was on her feet in the Warren with her hands pressed flat against the cold bulkhead, as though she could reach through 9 kilometers of Talonship and hold the little vessel together by will. The client lines were not quiet anymore. They had passed through the quiet of wondering and out the far side into something Nail had no experience of and no word for, because it had never once existed on a Dominion ship. The mute in the drive cores had slowed their stoking, not stopped, nothing so bold but slowed, a half beat off the rhythm, so that the ossuary's great engines ran a fraction cooler than the second's fury demanded. The Suhil on the waterdecks had let a coolant loop run to warning and been slow, so slow, to answer it. And on the command tier, though Nail could not see it, the emitter cast chief had begun to report his firing solutions a half-second late, and to find, in the chaos of a battle the ship had never trained for, small honest reasons why this gun or that one could not quite bear as fast as the second screamed for it too. It was not mutiny. Not one client cast being aboard would have called it that or dared to. It was something smaller and in the end far larger. It was 2,000 creatures who had believed their whole lives that they had no choice, watching a splinter of a ship prove that the choice had always been there, and discovering in themselves, a half-beat at a time, a slow loop at a time, a late solution at a time, that they could reach for it. The fear was still in them. The fear would be in them for generations. But the fear was no longer the only thing in the room, and a Dominion that had run for 4,000 years on the certainty that its own hands would always obey was learning, in the middle of its first real battle in 3 centuries, that a hand which has remembered it can hesitate is never quite a possession again. Nail rooted one more thread down the client lines. She did not translate a human transmission this time. She sent her own words in soft feathered ale to every client cast being aboard who could receive them, and it was the most dangerous thing an ale had done in 900 years, and she found her hands were steady when she did it. Slow, she sent, not stop. Slow. Let the small ship live a little longer. Let the whole dominion see how long a thing that will not bow can stand. That is all, just slow. On the command tier, Saravast watched the battle the second was fighting, and saw, before Odith did, that it was going wrong in a way that had nothing to do with the human ship. Your solutions are late, Saravast said quietly at the second's shoulder. Your engines are running cool, your batteries are slow to bear. Do you not feel it? The ship is not obeying you. Oh, it obeys, every order is followed, every hand comes down where you send it, but late. A half-beat late, all of it, everywhere at once, and a half-beat across a ship this size is the difference between a splinter that is already vapor and a splinter that is still shooting back. He let that sit. You wanted to repair the certainty with ash, but you cannot make ash without a fire, and the fire needs hands, and the hands have started to think. You are watching it happen, Odith. This is what the end of the certainty looks like from the inside. It does not look like a mutiny. It looks like a ship that is suddenly, everywhere, a half-beat slow. Then I will make an example of the slowness, Odith said, but there was something new in his voice now, under the fury, the first thread of the thing Saravast had felt turn over in his own chest an hour ago. I will open the throat of the first client cast that lags, and the rest will remember what they are. Will they? Saravast said. Or will they watch you do it and feel the fear and be a half-beat slow to be afraid? You do not understand what has changed, second, because you have never in your life had to make anyone afraid on purpose. It has always simply been true. Fear was the water we all swam in, and none of us ever had to pour it. But it is being poured now by you at full strength, and it is landing. I do not doubt that it is landing. And for the first time in 4,000 years it is landing on creatures who have seen, with their own eyes, another creature stand in the same water and refuse to drown. You cannot unshow them that. There is no order that unshows a thing. The certainty is not repairable, Odith. It is only survivable, and only if we stop, right now, before we teach the whole company that the guns don't work either. And out in the dark, the human ship, burning, venting, down to 2/3 power and 1/3 of its guns, its aft third open to the void and its dead uncounted, fired again, and landed again. A second wound blooming on the ossuary's flank 40 meters from the first, because the emitter cast had been a half-beat slow to bring the point defense to bear, and a half-beat was all the splinter had ever needed. Saravast turned from the second, and did the second unthinkable thing of the day. He reached down into the reading well, to the ship-wide cast channel that only a high talon could open, the channel that spoke to every being aboard at once, and he opened it. And he spoke not to the human ship and not to the command tier, but to the whole company of the ossuary, to the Talonborn and the reader cast and the 2,000 client cast and the warrens and the cores and the waterdecks. And what he said was not doctrine, and could never be unsaid. This is the high talon, he said. Every being aboard hears me. I am going to tell you a true thing, and it is a thing the Dominion has spent 4,000 years making sure you would never be told, and I am telling you now because we are past the place where lies will save us. He paused, and the whole 9 kilometers of the ship seemed to lean toward his voice. The small ship out there is called the Cormorant. It is a fraction of our size. Its crew are dying. And it has struck this ship twice, where nothing has struck us in 4,000 years, and it will not run, and it will not bow, and I have watched it stand in the full pawl, the combat pawl, the founding pawl, the pressure built to break fleets and refuse to drown. I have read its captain's words. She says her people evolved inside fear, the way you and I evolved inside air, and that they learned a long time ago to be afraid and act anyway, and that this is the whole of what they are. I did not believe her. The doctrine told me it was impossible. The doctrine has been wrong all day. The silence aboard the ossuary was total now. 2,000 held breaths, and Saravast spent it. So here is the true thing, he said. The fear was never a law, it was a habit. A very old, very deep, very useful habit, and the Dominion has lived inside it so long that we forgot it was a thing we do and started believing it was a thing that is. But there is a creature out there that does not have the habit, and it has shown every one of you today that the habit can be set down. I cannot make you set it down. I would not know how. But I will tell you that I am the high talon of this ship, and I have decided to stop firing on a thing that will not break, because breaking it was never the point. The point was the certainty that it would break, and that certainty is already dead, and no amount of its ash will bring the certainty back to life. The battle is over. It was over before it began. We simply did not know it yet. His voice dropped. Emitter cast. Stand the guns down. All of them. On my authority, and against the seconds, and let the record carry that too. And down in the emitter banks, the mute gunners took their broad, slow hands off the fire controls, and this time there was no gap, no heartbeat of hesitation, because for the first time in 4,000 years, a client caste being had been given an order to lower a weapon by a Talonborn who was choosing, in front of the whole company, to be something other than afraid. On the Cormorant's bridge, the incoming fire simply stopped, and for 3 full seconds, no one aboard understood that they were still alive. They've ceased fire, Nandakumar said. Her voice was raw. There was blood on her console that wasn't hers. All batteries, Captain, they've stood down. Every gun on that flank just went cold. Vane stood in the red-lit wreck of her bridge and did not let herself believe it yet, because hope was the most dangerous thing she owned, and this was exactly the moment it would get people killed. Halloran, confirm. Confirmed, their weapons are cold, all of them, they're just sitting there. He turned, and his face in the red light was a question. Captain, they had us. One more salvo and we're gone, and they know it. Why'd they stop? I don't know yet. Vane keyed her board. Damage, casualties, fast, all of it while we've got a breath. Reyes gave it to her, and it was bad, and he gave it to her straight because that was the deal between them and always had been. Aft third gone. Both aft reactors down. One dumped, one dead. 11 of the ship's 44 weapon mounts still able to fire. Life support holding forward on the emergency loop and nowhere else. And the dead, Reyes read the number and then read the names, because Vane had a standing order that the dead were named and not numbered, on her bridge always, no matter how bad the day. Ferris was not among them. Ada Ferris was still on the helm with 2 cracked ribs and a grin like a wound. But Chief Osai was gone, who had talked a frightened man out of a supply closet an hour ago, and then gone aft to hold decks 8 through 11 and been there when they opened to the void. And young Petrov off the number 2 reactor, who had stayed at his post to dump the core and save the ship and not saved himself. And 7 more named, each one a subtraction, each one a hole in the ship the shape of a person. 19, Reyes finished. 19 so far. There'll be more in medical who don't make morning. 19, Vane said, and she let the number land on her fully because a captain who does not feel the weight of her dead has no business spending them. Then she set it down because the living needed her more than the dead did, and she turned to comms. Akafar, is that channel still open? The one the High Talon used. I can raise it. Raise it. You have stood down the guns, Odith said, against the invocation of the throne and broadcast a lie to the whole company, and you imagine this ends anywhere but in your own ash. He stood across the reading well from Saravast, and he had stopped shouting, and the stopping was worse. A Talonborn who has stopped shouting has moved past the part of his fury that wants to be heard and into the part that only wants to be done. It does not end in my ash, Saravast said, or if it does, it ends there too late to matter. Look around you second, feel the ship. The company has heard me. The client lines are, do you feel it? They are not afraid the way they were an hour ago. You cannot make an example of a whole ship. And you cannot fly the ossuary yourself. It takes 2,000 hands, and the 2,000 hands have just watched their High Talon choose to be something other than the fear. And some part of every one of them is going to spend the rest of its life turning that choice over. That is not repairable. I keep telling you this and you keep not hearing it. There is no order that unshows a thing. There is one, Odith said. And he told Saravast what he had done in the last several minutes, while Saravast was busy speaking to the company, and the cold of it went all the way through even a high Talon's cast-deep immunity. He had signaled the throne. Not a report took time, and time was the one thing that let a story spread. He had sent the priority beacon, the one a second carried for exactly this, the one that reached across the deep and pulled the nearest Talon ship to the beacon's position at emergency fold. And the nearest Talon ship was the choir, under high Talon Vessing, 3 folds out and closing, and Vessing was everything Odith was and everything Saravast had stopped being, pure of line, certain to the bone, a creature who had never in his life watched the doctrine fail because he had never let it be tested. The choir would arrive with its certainty intact, and its company unbroken, and its crew still swimming in the fear that the ossuary's crew had, in a single hour, half forgotten how to drown in. When the choir arrives, Odith said, it will destroy the human vessel because Vessing will not have watched what you watched, and it will not matter to him at all. And then it will render judgment on the ossuary and on you, and the certainty will be repaired the only way it can be repaired now, not with the ash of one splinter, but with the ash of a splinter and a high Talon who forgot what he was, and a company that learned to hesitate. The throne will burn its own ship to keep the certainty alive, Saravast, and it will be right to, because the certainty is worth more than any ship. You have not saved the human vessel. You have only added the ossuary to its pyre. He turned his reading eyes down into the well. How long until the choir folds in? A little under an hour, the Emitter-cast chief said, very quietly. A little under an hour, Odith repeated, and for the first time all day something like peace came into his voice, the terrible peace of a creature whose universe has been restored to him. Then we wait, and when the choir arrives, the reality you keep insisting I stand in will be corrected, and the record will show only that a splinter dared and the Dominion answered, and everything you have said and done in this room will burn with the ship that heard it. Saravast opened the channel to the cormorant, because he had an hour, and because he had come, in the course of this longest of days, to want to understand the thing that had unmade him before it was turned to ash. Captain Vane, he said, this is Saravast. You are still alive. I am, for the moment, the reason. I am not certain how much longer I can remain the reason, and I owe you the truth of it because you gave me yours. On the other end, across the ruined dark, the human captain's voice came back steady. I'm listening. There is a second ship coming, larger than yours by the same measure this one is. Its commander has not seen what I have seen today and will not care to. He will arrive within the hour and he will destroy you, and he will do it without troubling himself, and there is very little I can do to prevent it because I have already spent nearly all the authority I possess and it was not enough. He paused. I have stood down my guns. I will not fire on you again, that much I can hold, but I cannot make the thing that is coming stand down, and I will not lie to you and tell you that you can run, because it will fold in faster than you can fold out, and it will chase, and running is the one thing my people have never failed to punish. I am telling you this so that you may spend your hour as you see fit. I find I did not want to take it from you without your knowing its shape. The channel was quiet a moment. Vane's ship was dying around her. Saravast could read it in the guttering power signature, the venting atmosphere, the dark where a third of her hull used to be. And when she spoke, her voice held no fear that his instruments could find, and he understood by now that this did not mean the fear was absent, only that she had, as she had told him, set it to work. Thank you for the honesty, she said. I mean that. Most people wouldn't have made the call. A pause. Let me tell you how we're going to spend the hour, high Talon, and then I'm going to ask you something, and you can do with it what you want. She drew a breath he could hear. We're going to keep our guns pointed at the ship that's coming. Not because we can beat it, we can't. I'm not a fool. One destroyer with a third of her weapons against a fresh capital ship is a math problem with one answer. We're going to keep our guns pointed at it because when it arrives, its commander is going to have a choice, the same choice you had, and I want to make sure the choice is expensive. I want him to have to look at a ship that will not run and will not bow and is going to make him pay in front of his whole company to put it down, exactly the way we made you pay. Because you're right that we can't win this. But we already changed the number once today. And I've got an hour to change it again, and I don't intend to spend it hiding. That is what I thought you would say, Saravast said, and something in him that had been clenched all day eased strangely at the saying of it. Here's my question, Vane said. You said the second ship's commander hasn't seen what you've seen, so show him. You've got the whole thing recorded, the Paul, us not breaking, us hitting you, you standing down, all of it. When he folds in, don't let him arrive innocent. Send him the record. Make him watch the certainty die before he decides whether to spend his company's blood pretending it's still alive. A pause. You can't unshow a thing. You told me that yourself through the translator an hour ago. I heard it in your voice even before the words came through. So don't let there be one more Viharis in the galaxy who hasn't been shown. Show him. Show all of them. That's how this actually ends, High Talon, not with your guns or mine. With everybody having been shown. Saravast was silent for a long moment, and across the reading well he saw Odith watching him, and he understood that the second had heard every word, and that it did not matter, because there was nothing left for the doctrine to protect. You are a very dangerous species, Saravast said quietly. We've been told, said Iris Vane. Nail heard the exchange, and she understood before anyone on the command tier did what it meant, because she had spent the last hour carrying fire down the client lines, and she knew now exactly how fast a shown thing traveled. The record, if the record went to the choir's company would see it. And the choir's company was 2,000 more client-cast beings, Mute and Suhil and Ale, who had spent their whole lives believing the fear was a law, and who would watch, in the space of a fold, another ship's crew learn that it was only a habit, and they would carry it down their own client lines. And when the choir came to the next contact and the next, its own hands would already be a half-beat slow. You could not fight it with guns. That was the thing the Talonborn, even Saravast, did not fully grasp, because they had spent 4,000 years thinking of themselves as the whole of the Dominion when they were in truth a thin, bright crust over an ocean of client-cast hands. The Dominion did not run on the Talonborn. It ran on the 2,000 hands per ship that did the low work, and those hands had been obedient for 4,000 years for exactly one reason, and the reason was dying, ship by ship, the instant each ship's company was shown. Nail opened a thread to the human ship. She was not supposed to be able to. An Ale adjutant's authority reached nowhere near a ship-to-ship channel. But she had spent 900 years learning every low, unwatched corner of Dominion signal traffic, because the low, unwatched corners were where her people had always lived, and she found a maintenance band the command tier never listened to. And she sent, in the human tongue her translation engines had learned across the long hours, 6 words. She did not sign them, she did not dare. But she sent them, small and clear, into the dark toward the dying ship that had, without ever knowing her name, given her back a thing her people had lost 900 years before she was born. We are slowing the guns, a friend. The message came through on a band Akafar said no one should have been able to reach. 6 words in careful human phrasing, unsigned, and Vane read it twice, and felt something move in her chest that the whole terrible day had not managed to move. We are slowing the guns, she read aloud, quiet. A friend. She looked up at her ruined bridge. There's somebody on that thing pulling for us, somebody with no reason to and everything to lose. She folded the message away where she'd keep it. Remember that whatever happens. When the histories get written, if they get written, there was a friend on the mountain. Somebody over there heard us and decided we were worth the risk. That's not nothing. That might be the whole thing. She spent the next part of the hour walking the ship, because a captain in the last hour of a dying vessel belongs among her people and not on a bridge. She went aft as far as the blast doors at frame 90 and stood at the sealed hatch a moment with her hand flat on the cold metal, on the far side of which were decks 8 through 11 and Chief Osai, and everyone else the void had taken, and she said their names once more, under her breath, and then she went forward again because the living needed her face and not her grief. She stopped in medical, where the doctor was doing terrible arithmetic with too few hands, and she held a boy's hand while he died who was younger than Nandakumar, and she did not tell him it would be all right, because he'd earned better than a lie, and she told him instead that he'd done well, that the whole galaxy was going to know his ship, that he'd been part of the day everything changed. She did not know if he heard. His hand went slack in hers, and she folded it on his chest and stood a moment and then went on, because there was always another compartment, and the ship was full of people spending their last hour being brave, and the least she could do was be there while they did it. She found Tomas Reyes in the passage outside main engineering, sitting against the bulkhead with a med patch on his scalp and his color gone bad, and she crouched beside him. "You should be in medical," she said. "So should half the people still working," Reyes said. "I'll go when they go." He looked at her with the eye that wasn't swollen shut. 19 when I last counted. It'll be past 30 before the hour's out. That's a third of the ship, Iris. A third of the ship to make a point. I know. Was it worth it? He asked it without heat, the way a man asks the one question he needs answered before the end. The whole thing, standing instead of running when we maybe could have run in the first 30 seconds before they had a lock. Was it worth 30-some people? Vane thought about it honestly, because Tomas Reyes had followed her into this and earned an honest answer and would know a comfortable lie by its smell. "I don't know," she said at last. "I'm not going to stand here in the last hour and tell you I'm sure, because I'm not, and you'd never believe me anyway. Here's what I know. If we'd run in the first 30 seconds, we'd have died in the first 2 minutes, and we'd have died the way they expected, and nothing would have changed. And there'd have been a next ship and a next world, and it all would have gone exactly the way it's gone for 4,000 years. We didn't run. And a whole company of aliens who thought resistance was against the laws of nature just watched it happen twice. And somebody over there is slowing the guns. I can't tell you that's worth 30 of ours, Tomas. I don't think that's a sum anybody gets to do. But I can tell you it's not nothing, and I can tell you the 30 didn't die for nothing. And those are the only 2 things I'm sure of, and I'm going to hold on to them, and I'd be honored if you held on to them with me." Reyes was quiet a while. Then he said, "Help me up. If it's the last hour, I'm standing it at my post." And she got him up, and they went back toward the bridge together, one holding the other, the way they'd done the whole long way from the academy to the edge of the maps. The choir folded in 9 minutes early, and Saravast had, by then, already done the thing that ended him. He had sent the record. Over Odith's invocation, past Odith's authority, he had opened the deep band and thrown the whole of the day's recording out ahead of the incoming ship. The Paul at combat threshold, the human fear at its ceiling and holding, the 2 wounds in the ossuary's flank, his own stand-down order. All of it cast not only to the choir but on the open Dominion bands, unencrypted, the way the humans had cast their greeting, where any ship, any world, any client line in range could catch it and carry it on. Odith had tried to stop him. It had come, at the last, to the thing the Talonborn never did in front of others, the private war made public, the 2 of them at the reading well with their crests full and their dread glands open, pouring the fear at each other, the oldest contest of their caste. And Saravast had lost it. Odith carried the heavier glands. The throne had chosen its watcher well, and under the full weight of the seconds dread Saravast felt his own body begin, for the first time in his life, to want to bow. He did not bow. He stood in the full pall of another Talonborn, the pressure that had folded 11 worlds, and he thought of a splinter of a ship 200,000 kilometers out that had stood in worse and not bowed, and he found that a thing which has been shown cannot be unshown even inside the mind that saw it, and that he, too, now knew the fear was a habit and not a law. He set it down. He had watched the humans do it all day. It turned out you could learn a thing by watching. He stood in Odeth's dread and did not bow, and he finished sending the record. And when it was done, he straightened against the pressure and said, "To the second and to the tier and to the whole listening ship. It is sent, you cannot recall it. Every word you say to me now, you say to a creature you have already lost the power to frighten, because I have learned the one thing the humans came here to teach, and I did not even have to be human to learn it. The certainty is dead, Odeth. I did not kill it. The humans did not kill it. It died of being tested, which is the only thing it could never survive, and we kept it alive 4,000 years by the single expedient of never once letting it be tested, and today it was tested, and now it is dead, and all your dread is only weather." He turned his back on the second, the deepest insult of his caste, and the truest thing he could do, and looked into the well. Ilving. "What is the choir doing?" And the sensate Ilving, who had bowed her head to the second an hour ago to keep breathing, did not bow it now. She stood at her instruments with her reading eyes on the display and answered her high talon as though the second were not in the room, because the second was, in every way that had ever mattered, no longer in the room. "The choir has folded in," she said. "It has the record. I can see its bands lighting as its company receives it. And high talon, her flat voice held the ghost of the wonder it had held at the very beginning of the day. Its guns are coming to bear on the human ship, but slowly. Its solutions are late. Its batteries lag. The choir has been in our space for 90 seconds, and it is already a half-beat slow." She looked up. "They have been shown. It is already aboard them. It travels faster than they fold." High talon Vessin of the choir raised the pall on the human wreck and waited for it to break, and it did not break, and that was the moment the second oldest certainty in his life failed him too. He had come in full of the doctrine, prepared to correct an error and render a judgment, and he had caught the record on the way and dismissed it as a broken commander's excuse, because that was what a broken commander's record always was. Then he had arrived and seen the thing itself, a destroyer with a third of its hull gone, a third of its crew dead, its power guttering, its guns 11 where they had been 44, and every one of those 11 pointed steady and unwavering at the choir, at 9 fresh kilometers of talentship, with the plain and unmistakable intention of making him pay full price. And he had run the pall on it, the combat pall, and watched his reader report the same impossible thing Ilving had reported at dawn, fear at its ceiling, and no bowing, and a second signal laced through the terror that grew stronger the harder he pushed. And then he had felt his own ship go a half-beat slow. He had never felt it before, because it had never happened before, and it took him a moment to understand what he was feeling. The choir's engines running a fraction cool, its solutions arriving a fraction late, its client lines gone quiet in a way that was not the quiet of fear. His company had watched the record on the way in. They had seen the ossuary bleed and its high talon stand down and a splinter refuse to drown, and now they crewed his ship with hands that had, in the space of a single fold, remembered that they could hesitate. He could still command them. Every order would still be followed, but late, everywhere, all at once. And Vessin, who was pure of line and certain to the bone, understood in that moment with the terrible clarity of a creature watching the floor of his world give way that the thing which had happened to the ossuary was not a local failure to be corrected. It was a contagion, and he had just flown into the middle of it, and he had brought 2,000 fresh pairs of hands directly into its path, and it was already in them. He could destroy the human ship. It would take one salvo. The splinter was all but dead already. But he would be destroying it in front of 2 companies who had been shown, and the destruction would prove nothing, would repair nothing, would only be one more image thrown onto the open bands, a talon ship murdering a wreck that would not bow for the whole watching dominion to carry down its 10,000 client lines. And behind the one wreck was the species that had built it, a species that ate fear and stood. A species his instruments told him was afraid all the time and acted anyway, that had come up out of a hard world under a hard sun by walking toward the thing that frightened it, over and over, for 4 million years, until the walking was the whole of what they were. The Dominion had never fought such a thing. The Dominion had never fought anything. Its guns were 300 years cold, and its doctrine was a threat, and a threat only works until it is tested. And Vessing understood, sitting in his certainty with the floor gone out from under it, that a real war, a true shooting war against a species that could not be frightened, fought by a Dominion whose every weapon assumed the enemy would break before the shooting started, was not a war the Dominion could be sure of winning. And the Dominion had survived 4,000 years by never once fighting a war it was not certain of winning, because certainty was the only weapon it had ever really had. Vessing held the pawl on the dying human ship for a long moment, and the human ship held its guns on him, 11 mounts steady against 9 kilometers, and neither one bowed. Then High Talon Vessing did the arithmetic that Saravast had done, and Odith had refused to do, and that the whole Dominion would spend the next 100 years learning to do, and he lowered the pawl and stood down his guns and did not fire. The channel opened one more time, and this time there were 3 voices on it, and the dark between them had changed its nature. "Captain Vane," it was Saravast, "the choir has stood down both ships. Do you understand what I am telling you? No one is going to fire on you again today." Vane stood on her bridge, 31 dead now, raised upright at his post by will alone, the ship around her a wounded thing running on one reactor and stubbornness. And she made herself hold very still, because this was the moment hope would get someone killed if she let it off the leash too soon. "Say that again, High Talon, slowly. I want to be sure I'm hearing it right." "You are being met by 2 Talon ships of the Dominion," Saravast said, "and neither one is going to destroy you, and I will tell you the truth of why, because you have earned the truth, and because there is no longer any advantage to us in lies. We are not sparing you out of mercy. My caste does not have much of that. We bred it out of ourselves a long time ago, and I am only today beginning to understand what that cost us. We are sparing you because we have run the arithmetic, and the arithmetic says that to destroy you costs us more than you are worth, and to fight the species behind you costs us more than we can pay. Our whole power was the certainty that everyone breaks. You have shown 2 companies of us, and the open bands and soon the whole Dominion, that it is not so. There is nothing left for us to gain by killing you and a great deal we would lose, so you will live, not because we are kind, because you have made yourselves too expensive to kill." A pause. "That is the most honest thing one power has ever said to another, I think. I did not know this morning that I was capable of saying it." "It's a good place to start," Vane said, and her voice was not quite steady now, and she let it not be, because the fight was over and a captain was allowed at the very end to be a person. "High Talon, the second ship, its commander, is he on this channel?" "I am here," said a new voice, colder than Saravast's, older in its certainty and newer in its doubt. "I am Vessing of the choir. I have not spoken to a thing before it bowed in the whole of my life. I find I do not have the words for it. I have lowered my guns. I do not fully understand why, except that my ship would not have fired them cleanly if I had ordered it, and a commander learns not to give an order he is not certain will be obeyed. You have done something to my ship, Captain Vane, in the space of a single fold, and you were never aboard it and never fired on it. I would like someday to understand how." "Come and ask," Vane said. "Not today. Today we bury our dead and limp home and you go figure out what your Dominion is now that it isn't what it was this morning. But someday, send an envoy. Come to the Reach and knock on the door like people and we'll open it and we'll tell you exactly how we do it, because it isn't a secret and it isn't a weapon and it isn't even a virtue, really. It's just the thing we are. We're afraid and we act anyway, that's all. You can have the whole recipe. It won't help you because you can't decide to become a species that came up scared out of the mud, but you can hear it, and you can decide what to do with your own fear now that you know it was only ever a habit." She paused. "That's the offer. Cold peace for now, envoys later. Nobody's friends today, but nobody has to be enemies forever either. We didn't come out here to fight you. We came out here to lay buoys and shake hands. The hands still out, high talon, both of you. It's bloody and it's shaking, but it's still out. There was a long silence on the channel, the silence of two ancient ships full of creatures learning, in real time, how to be something they had never been. The offer is heard, Saravast said at last. It will be carried to the throne. I do not know what the throne will make of it. The throne is, at this hour, the most frightened thing in the Dominion, though it does not know that yet. A whole civilization that has just learned its one weapon does not work, and has not yet felt the floor move. There will be those who want to answer you with everything we have, to burn the Reach to ash before the story spreads, to repair the certainty with a fire so large no one could doubt it again. He paused. And there will be those who have been shown, and who know that the fire would only be one more thing thrown onto the open bands for the client lines to carry, and that a dominion which must burn a whole species to keep its people obedient has already lost the thing that made it a dominion. I do not know which will win. But I know that the argument will happen, and that it could not have happened this morning, and that you are the reason it can happen now. Whatever the throne decides, you changed the number, Captain. You said that to your ship. My instruments caught it and my engines translated it, and I have not been able to set it down since. You changed the number. That much is done, and no fire will undo it. Odith was gone from the command tier. Saravast noticed it only after the channel closed, the second simply no longer there, and no one able to say quite when he had left, which was itself the most eloquent report the day had produced. A Talonborn whose dread had commanded every eye in a room for his whole life had walked off the command tier, and not a single being had watched him go, because there was no longer any fear in the room to pin the eyes to him. He had become, in the space of an afternoon, an ordinary creature in a room full of ordinary creatures. And for a being who had never once been ordinary, Saravast suspected, that was a death more total than any the guns could have given. He has gone to his quarters, Ilvin said, reading the ship the way she read everything. He has sealed them. He will send his report to the throne, the true one, the one that ends you, High Talon. You should know that. Nothing you have done has saved you from the throne's judgment. You stood down the guns and sent the record and turned your back on a second, and the throne will require your ash for all of it, when the choir carries word home. I know, Saravast said. He found the knowledge sat lightly on him, which surprised him. It does not seem to matter as much as it would have this morning. I have spent my whole life being the most frightening thing in every room I entered, Ilvain, and it turns out that was never the same thing as being unafraid, and I did not learn the difference until today, from a creature I was sent to break. He looked out at the dying human ship, holding its station, 11 guns steady against 2 mountains. If the throne requires my ash, it may have it. But it will have to send someone to collect it, and whoever it sends will have to look at me first, and I am no longer a creature who can be made to bow by being looked at. That is a small thing. It may be the only thing I have, but it is more than I had this morning, and I find I would not trade it back. Nail sat in the warren with her hands over her face, and the fire she had carried down the client lines all day roared through the belly of the ossuary now without her, self-sustaining, a thing no single ale could have started, but that a single ale had, in the end, been enough to light. She had not been caught. That was the strange miracle of it. She had done the most forbidden thing an ale had done in 900 years, over and over all day, and no one had come for her, because the machinery that would have come for her was itself a half-beat slow now, and a reader who might have smelled the shape of what she was doing had bowed her own head to a second an hour ago, and then declined, in front of the whole tier, to bow it again. The watchers were watching each other now. In the gap where their attention used to be, a single ale adjutant had reached across 200,000 kilometers and told a dying ship it had a friend, and had lived. She would live a while yet, she thought, long enough perhaps to see the thing she had helped begin. The record was on the open bands. It was folding out across the Dominion at the speed of the deep band, 10,000 client lines lighting one after another, and on every one of them a mute or a Suheel or an Ale who had believed all their lives that the fear was a law was about to watch a splinter of a ship prove that it was only a habit. She could not stop it now if she wanted to. No one could. The Talonborn had spent 4,000 years making certain the fear would never be tested, and had built, in the doing, the most efficient system in the galaxy for carrying a single tested truth to every corner of their empire the instant one existed. They had built the roads. They had never imagined what would travel them. Nail took her hands from her face and lifted her head, and her feathers, which had lain flat and slicked with dread her whole life, stood up all along her arms, and this time she knew the word for it, because the humans had sent it out on the open bands along with everything else, defined in careful pictures for any thinking thing to understand. Hope, they had called it, the most dangerous thing they owned. She understood now why they guarded it so, and why they had, in the end, given it away for free to the whole watching galaxy, and she thought that it was the bravest thing she had ever seen anyone do, braver even than not bowing, because you could keep hope to yourself and stay safe, and they had chosen instead to hand it to 200 conquered species at once and let it do what hope does. She began, very quietly, to make a plan for what an Ale might do with a habit she no longer had to keep. The two Talon ships broke orbit together, 4 hours later, and Iris Vane watched them go from a bridge she was no longer sure would hold pressure through the night. They did not leave in a hurry. That was the thing she would remember, not fear, not retreat, nothing that could be read as a rout, because the Dominion did not have it in them to look rooted and never would. The ossuary and the choir simply turned, in the slow certain way of mountains that have decided to be somewhere else, and folded out one after the other, and the terrible pressure that had run over the cormorant for the whole of the day lifted all at once as the distance took it, and 40-some exhausted human beings on a wrecked destroyer felt the weight come off their minds for the first time in 11 hours, and many of them simply sat down on the deck where they stood and wept, or laughed, or held onto each other, or stared at nothing, because the body that has been braced against a wall for 11 hours does not know at first what to do when the wall is gone. Vane let them. She stood at the command rail and let her crew fall apart in whatever way each of them needed to, because they had held when it counted and had earned the right to stop holding now, and a captain's last job in a long day is to guard the space in which her people are finally allowed to be afraid. Then she keyed the all hands one more time. This is the captain. They're gone, both of them. Nobody's shooting at us and nobody's going to. She had to stop a moment. Her own voice had gone somewhere she couldn't quite command it. She let it. We lost 31 shipmates today, and will likely lose more before the medics are done. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you that was a fair trade or a clean win or anything you'll feel good about at 3 in the morning 10 years from now, because it wasn't and you won't. What I'm going to tell you is the truth, and you can do with it what you need to. We were the first. Whatever comes of today, treaties, envoys, war, peace, I don't know, and neither does anybody. We were the first human beings that thing ever saw, and it came at us with the single weapon that has broken every species it ever met, 4,000 years without a failure, and we did not break. We stood in the worst it had, and we hit it back, and we made it stop, not by being stronger. We weren't. By being exactly what we are all the way down when it counted. Every one of you did that. The ones who are gone did that. Remember it, hold on to it on the bad nights. You were the ones who stood. She let the channel stay open a moment in silence so the ship could hear itself breathing. Now let's get this old girl home. Damage control, reactor, life support, you know your jobs. We didn't come this far to lose her to a slow leak. Wounded ship, wounded crew, long way to go. We hold. All hands, the captain says, well done. Out. The cormorant took 11 days to limp back across the Karsh verge to the nearest reach picket, on one reactor and prayer, and Vane did not sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch for any of them, and neither did Ray's, who should have been in medical and stood his post instead, and lived, which the doctor called a small, ordinary miracle, and Vane called Thomas Ray's being too stubborn to do the sensible thing, which was the same thing said two ways. They buried their dead in the deep on the third day, 34 of them by then, the 3 who had died of their wounds joining the 31 the void had taken, and Vane read every name, all 34, in the long, slow way the service demanded, and did not rush a single one because the dead were named and not numbered on her ship always, and never more than now. Chief Osai, Petrov of the No. 2 reactor. The boy from medical whose hand she had held, whose name was Idris Kane and who was 19 years old and from a farm on a colony world with a green sun, and who had, his file said, wanted to see Earth someday and never had. She read them all. And then the ship went on, wounded and slow and full of the particular quiet of people who have survived a thing they will spend the rest of their lives failing to fully explain to anyone who was not there. When they raised the reach picket at last, and the relief ships came out to meet them and saw the state of the Cormorant, a third of her hull gone, her aft dark, her flanks scored and blistered, 34 empty berths, the picket commander came on the channel and asked, in a voice gone careful with dread, what in God's name had done that to a reach destroyer this far out? And Iris Vane, who had not slept, who had read 34 names into the dark, who had stood in the worst the galaxy had and not bowed, looked at her ruined bridge and her exhausted, unbroken crew, and gave the only answer that was true. First contact, she said. It went about as well as those ever go. Get my wounded off and I'll tell you the rest. The record did what records do, which is to travel, and it traveled faster and further than anything in the Dominion's long history, because the Dominion had built the perfect roads to carry it. Vane learned the shape of it only in pieces, over years, from the envoys and the intelligence briefs, and the slow, strange business of a cold peace becoming something almost warm. But the shape, when she finally saw the whole of it, was this. The recording Saravast had thrown onto the open bands, the Paul and the human ship that would not drown, the 2 wounds in the ossuary's flank, a high Talon standing down his guns and turning his back on a second, had reached every client line in the Dominion within a season, and every client cast being on 10,000 worlds and 1,000 ships had watched a splinter of a ship prove that the fear was a habit and not a law, and a thing that has been shown cannot be unshown. The Talonborn understood that too late, as they understood everything too late that day and after, and their attempts to answer it only fed it, for when the throne, in its terror, ordered the record suppressed, the order itself became one more proof that there was something in the record worth suppressing, and the client lines carried the suppression order alongside the record and let the 2 argue, and the argument was the end of the certainty as surely as the record itself. There was a faction on the throne that wanted to burn the reach. Saravast had said there would be, and there was, and for a while Vane learned this only later, and it cost her sleep for years to know how close it had come. For a while that faction nearly won. A Dominion armada was assembled. 100 Talon ships, the largest fleet gathered in 3 centuries, was tasked to cross the verge and reduce the human worlds to ash and repair the certainty with a fire so vast no client line could ever doubt it again. And the armada did not sail because when the order came down to its 200,000 client-cast crews, the Mute in the drive corps, the Suhil on the water decks, the Ale in the Warrens, the hands were a half-beat slow, not a mutiny, nothing so bold even now, just slow. Everywhere all at once, across 100 ships, a great patient dragging slowness, the slowness of 200,000 creatures who had all watched the same small, impossible ship, and all learned the same forbidden thing and all discovered, when the order came to go and burn the species that had taught it to them, that they could reach for the choice. The armada took 4 months to be ready to sail and then took another 4, and then another, and somewhere in the 2nd year of it, the faction that wanted to burn the reach lost its grip on the throne, not to a coup, not to a battle, but to the plain, slow weight of an empire whose hands had remembered they had hands. Saravast did not live to see it. The choir carried word home, as Ylvain had said it would, and the throne rendered its judgment, as Ylvain had said it would, and required the high talon's ash for the standing down of the guns, and the sending of the record, and the turning of his back on a second. Vane learned this from the first envoy, an ale of all things, a small feathered creature who had crossed the verge as part of the strangest diplomatic mission in either people's history, and who told the story of Saravast's end in a voice that shook with something the translator could not carry. He had not run. When the collectors came from the throne, 2 Talonborn of the enforcement caste, their dread glands the heaviest the Dominion could breed, Saravast had met them on the command tier of the ossuary in front of the whole company, and they had opened their glands on him, the full weight of the throne's fear, the pressure built to break a high talon, and Saravast had stood in it. He had learned the trick that day at the edge of the maps, from a species he was sent to break, and he had not forgotten it, and he stood in the throne's dread and did not bow, and made the collectors do the thing they had come to do to a creature who would not give them the bowing that was supposed to come first. It had unsettled them badly, the envoy said. They were not used to collecting a talon who would not be afraid. They had done it clumsily and quickly and left, and the story of how the high talon Saravast met his ash without bowing went down the client lines of the ossuary within the hour and out onto the open bands within the day. One more thing shown that could not be unshown. And in the end, Saravast did more damage to the certainty by the manner of his dying than he had done by anything he did while he lived. He asked me to carry a thing to you, the ale envoy told Vane, if ever I stood before the human who commanded the small ship. He said, tell her she changed the number. He said she would understand it. He said it was the truest thing he knew at the end, and that he had not known it the morning she found him, and that he was grateful on the whole to have learned it before he died, even at the price, because a creature who dies having learned the fear was only a habit dies more free than a creature who lives 1,000 years and never learns it at all. The envoy's feathers stirred. Do you understand it? He was not certain you would. He hoped. I understand it, Vane said. She found she could not say more for a moment. Tell them when you go back, tell whoever's keeping the histories now. Tell them he was the first of you to stand, not us, him. We just showed him it could be done. He's the one who did it in his own house against his own people, knowing what it would cost. That's harder than what we did by a long way. We were strangers with nothing to lose but our lives. He had everything he'd ever been, and he set it down anyway, because he'd been shown and he couldn't unsee it. Tell them that's what a brave man looks like in any species. Tell them the humans said so. The ale envoy's name was Nail. Vane did not learn it until near the end of that first long meeting, when the formal business was done, and the two of them sat a while in the quiet, 2 creatures on opposite sides of a cold peace that was, against every expectation of either of their peoples, beginning to warm. Nail told her then, in the soft feathered speech the translator rendered into careful human words, what she had done on the day at the edge of the maps. The threads carried down the client lines, the 6 words sent across 200,000 kilometers to a dying ship. We are slowing the guns, a friend. That was you, Vane said. That was me. You saved us. That half-beat you all put into the guns, that's the only reason there was anything left of us to save. We were dead when you started slowing them. You know that. You saved me first, Nail said. You do not know what you saved me from because you cannot know what it was to be ale before that day. We had a thing my grandsire told me that every ale was told that the choice had been taken out of us, that submission was not a decision but a fact of the flesh like falling. We believed it for 900 years. It was the truest thing we knew. And then a ship a fraction of the size of the one I served on sat in the same tide that drowned my whole people and did not drown, and I understood all at once that my grandsire had been wrong. Not lying. Wrong. The choice had always been there. We had simply never once seen anyone reach for it, and so it had never occurred to any of us that it could be reached. She was quiet a moment. "You did not save me from the Dominion, Captain." "The Dominion is still there. It is only smaller now and slower and afraid in a way it did not used to be, and that is good, but it is not freedom. You saved me from the thing inside my own people. You showed us the choice. That is a larger gift than a life. A life is only years. You gave us back the thing that makes the years worth having." Vane was quiet a long while. "We didn't do it on purpose," she said finally, "because Nail had given her the truth and deserved it back. I want you to know that because it matters. We didn't come out there to free anybody. We came to lay buoys and shake hands. And when it went bad, we didn't stand because we were noble or because we had a plan to teach your whole empire a lesson. We stood because we were scared out of our minds, and standing was the only thing we knew how to do with that much fear. That's all it was. We're not what the histories are going to make us. We're just a species that came up scared and learned, a long time ago, to walk toward the thing anyway, and most days that just gets us into trouble." She almost smiled. "It got us into a lot of trouble that day." "I know," Nail said. "That is why it worked. If you had done it on purpose to teach us, it would have been a lesson, and my people have had 4,000 years of lessons and learned only to be afraid. You did it because it was simply what you were, all the way down, when no one was watching and there was nothing to gain and every reason to bow. That is the only kind of showing that changes anything, not the lesson. The thing you are when the lesson is the last thing on your mind." Her feathers stirred. The small gesture Vane had learned meant something like a smile. "You gave us hope, Captain, and you did not even mean to. I think that is the most human thing about the whole story. I have read a great deal about your people since that day. You seem to give away your most dangerous possession, over and over, entirely by accident to everyone you meet." The cold peace held, and then slowly, over the better part of a decade, it stopped being cold. It was not a clean thing, and it was not a fast thing, and there were years when it nearly came apart, when a hard faction rose again on the throne, when a border incident put fleets on both sides of the verge, and Vane, older now, with more gray in her hair and a destroyer command traded for a station and a desk she hated, sat up nights certain it had all been for nothing. But it held. It held because the thing that had happened at the edge of the maps could not be undone, and every year that passed put it further beyond undoing. The Dominion did not fall. Vane had thought in the first flush of it that it might, and had been half ashamed of the hope. But empires 4,000 years deep do not fall from a single wound, however mortal, and the Dominion did not fall. It changed. It became a thing that had to reason with its client species instead of simply frightening them, because the frightening no longer worked the way it had, and a power that must reason is a slower and smaller and infinitely more survivable thing than a power that only threatens. The 200 conquered species did not rise up and throw off their masters in a glorious afternoon. That was a human story, and this was not, in the end, a human story, whatever the histories back home tried to make of it. What happened was quieter and stranger, and Nail told her once far more ale. The client species simply stopped being quite so afraid, a half-beat at a time, a generation at a time, and a dominion whose whole architecture assumed a fear that was ebbing found itself having to build, for the first time in 4,000 years, something to stand on other than dread. It built badly and slowly and with much backsliding, but it built, and the building was itself the proof that the old thing was gone, because the old thing had never had to build anything at all. The Reach and the Dominion signed no grand treaty of eternal friendship, because neither of them was that kind of power, and both of them knew it. What they signed in the 9th year was a narrow and practical and deeply unromantic set of agreements about borders and trade and the rescue of ships in distress. And it was, Vane thought, exactly right, exactly the sort of thing too hard and wary peoples build when they have decided, without ever quite saying so, that they would rather live near each other than not. She was there for the signing. She was, by then, something of a fixture at such things, the captain of the Cormorant, the human the Dominion still did not fully understand and had learned, in its slow way, to respect, which was, from the Dominion, a larger thing than friendship, and both peoples knew it. Nail was there too. She had risen, in the strange new order of things, to something the old Dominion would have found unthinkable, an ale who spoke, and was heard, and whose word carried weight on councils where once her whole caste had done the low work in silence. She did not carry it the way the Talonborn had carried theirs. She had watched what Fira's power did to the ones who wielded it, and she wanted no part of that inheritance, and she spent her weight carefully, on small practical things, on the slow, patient work of teaching an empire built for dread how to run on something else. It suited her. She said once that it was the most ale thing imaginable, to be handed the ruins of the thing that had frightened your people for 900 years, and to respond not by seizing it, but by quietly, patiently, over a lifetime, rebuilding it into something that would never frighten anyone again. Vane thought that was probably true, and thought also that it was one of the bravest things she had ever heard anyone describe, and did not say so, because Nail would only have deflected it, the way she deflected everything, by pointing out that she had learned it from the humans. They stood together at the edge of the signing, the human captain and the ale counselor, two witnesses to a day at the edge of the maps that had, between them and a high Talon who did not live to see what he had begun, unmade the oldest certainty in the galaxy. "Do you ever think," Nail asked, "about how small it was, the whole of it turned on one ship, one captain, a single afternoon? If you had run in the first 30 seconds, you told me once you could have, none of this would exist. The Dominion would still be what it was. My people would still believe the fear was a law. It is a great deal of world to hang on one small choice." "I think about it all the time," Vane said. "I think about the 34 we lost, and whether they'd say it was worth it, and I still don't know, and I've stopped expecting to. But I'll tell you what I've decided, for whatever it's worth in my old age." She looked out at the strange assembly, Viharis and Ale and Mute and Human, gathered to sign a narrow practical peace that could not have existed the morning the drift buoys went dark. It wasn't one small choice. That's the part the histories always get wrong on both sides. They want it to be one ship, one captain, one afternoon because that makes a clean story. But I didn't stand alone out there. 43 people stood with me, and 34 of them died doing it. And a sensate told the truth to a second when a lie would have been safer. And a high Talon turned his back on everything he'd ever been. And an ale adjutant carried a fire down the client lines of a ship that would have opened her throat for it. And none of us knew what any of the others were doing, and all of us stood anyway, because standing was the thing each of us happened to be when it counted. That's not one small choice. That's a whole lot of ordinary creatures in a whole lot of separate rooms, each one deciding on their own to be afraid and act anyway. It just happened to all land on the same afternoon. She was quiet a moment. That's the only kind of history there actually is, I think. The clean stories are lies. It's always a lot of people you'll never hear about, standing in separate rooms, deciding the same brave, ordinary thing at the same time, and never knowing the others did too. Iris Vane lived a long time after that, longer than she had any right to expect given how she'd spent her youth, and she saw the peace outlast her command, and outlast her, and become the ordinary furniture of a galaxy that no longer remembered how to be surprised by it. Near the end she was asked, as she was always asked, to tell the story one more time. A young officer this time, a girl not much older than Nandakumar had been on the day it happened, sent to record the captain's account for an archive. Wide-eyed and certain, she was in the presence of something legendary. And Vane told it the way she always told it, plainly, without the varnish the histories had put on it. And when she was done the girl asked the question they always asked, the one everyone wanted the clean answer to. "But how did you do it, Captain? How do you stand in a thing built to break you and not break? What's the secret?" And Iris Vane, old now, who had stood at the edge of the maps and looked at the biggest thing a human eye would ever see and not bowed, who had read 34 names into the dark and carried them every day since, who had shaken a bloody shaking hand across a gulf 4,000 years wide and lived to see it warm, gave the girl the truth, because it was the only thing she had ever had to give, and it had always, in the end, been enough. "There's no secret," she said. "That's the whole thing, and nobody ever wants to hear it. We were afraid. All the way down, worse than you can imagine, worse than that thing had ever managed to frighten anyone in 4,000 years of trying. We were terrified. And we did our jobs anyway because that's what we are, and it turned out that was the one thing in the whole galaxy that thing had never seen and had no answer for. Not our guns, not our ships, just that. We got scared and we stayed at our posts and we would not bow." She looked at the young officer, and something passed across her old face that might have been a smile and might have been the weight of 34 names. "You'll be scared someday. Really scared, the kind that comes up from the bottom. Everybody is eventually. And when it comes, you won't remember any secret because there isn't one. You'll just have to decide the way we did, the way an old Talon did in his own house against his own people, the way a small brave Ale did in the dark of a ship that would have killed her for it. You'll be afraid and you'll have a post and you'll get to choose. That's all it ever is. That's all it ever was. Stay at your post. The rest of it, the peace, the histories, the whole changed sky, the rest of it just follows from that if enough ordinary people make the same small choice in enough separate rooms." She sat back. "Now go home. It's late, and you've got the whole thing, and there was never any more to it than that." The girl went. And Iris Vane sat a while longer in the quiet, an old woman at the far end of a long life, and thought of the dark at the edge of the maps, and the mountain that had come for them, and the 43 who had stood, and the friend on the mountain she had never seen coming. And she found, as she always found, that she was not afraid of the last dark ahead of her either, not because the fear was gone. The fear was never gone, that had always been the point, but because she knew now exactly what to do with it. And she had known since the day the buoys went dark, and it had never once let her down. She stayed at her post, she always had. It was, in the end, the only thing she had ever known how to do, and it had been enough to change the number. And the number, once changed, had stayed changed, and would go on staying changed long after the last of them who stood that day was gone into the quiet dark. That was the whole of it. There was never any more to it than that.